We're combining all the best old school wisdom with all the top new school methods to bring you the optimal way to coach and play the great game of baseball. This is the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass with Coach Bo.
Welcome, coaches. This is Coach Bo. Good to be here with you. Episode 92, our weekly get-together here. Before we get into part one of this episode, in part two, I'm going to share with you what the hitting coach at the University of Arkansas says about their hitting approach, and they were the #1 team in the country for most of this past season. And this is definitely something that youth coaches can use with youth players. In part three, we're going to do part two of the Coach Tim Murray interview, and he is going to share out some good stuff. He's going to share out with all of you a common mistake that youth and travel ball teams make that slows down player development, player improvement big time. He also gives us a great tip to dealing with a problem parent. He also shares out building solid rapport and how to do it with players that don't spend as much time in the lineup, that spend a little bit more time on the bench. And the last thing he shares out, another solid gold tip, or should I say tips. Coach Murray shares out exactly what youth players need to be good at when they show up at high school tryouts. A coach with over a quarter century of coaching experience alone will share out later in the episode exactly what he and his coaching staff would look for when it came to freshman tryouts and picking players for the high school team. So we'll get into that. Part one of today's episode, something different. I'm going back and I'm going to discuss quickly here. We're going to move through it because I'm all about efficiency, getting a lot of information to you as fast as possible. The 5 best coaching tweets that I saw this last week from Twitter, or that maybe I even sent out myself. You can follow me at 8020_baseball, 8020_baseball. That's on Twitter. It's just baseball coaching tips and retweets, baseball stuff. Every once in a while, there's a topic on life, but it's something as coaches we can definitely use also. So the first tweet came from Matt Rhea. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Rhea, R-H-E-A. He is a PhD. He is a director of sports science, Alabama football. He's the director of sports science for Alabama football. Arguably the best athletic program around right now. And definitely the best coached program that I know of right now. The most well-rounded, best coached program at any level that I know of right now. And I study this stuff. So Matt sent out a tweet that said, quote, "An NFL scout told me this week that he's never seen anything like our practices, Alabama football practices. The speed, the effort, the competition. It's no wonder this place spits out NFL studs every year. It's no accident. Future first round picks battling every day in practice makes the other one better." Now let's put aside that last sentence about future first round picks battling it out. The rest of it is absolutely usable, applicable towards youth sports, youth baseball. He's saying what makes their practices so good, among other things, but the top things are the speed of the practice. Where have we talked about that? Where have you heard that? We've talked about that here. My 20-40-40 ratio, it's not an exact ratio, but the 20-40-40 ratio for all of your drills. That last 40% is playing faster than your typical game speed. Not a lot faster, but faster. Faster ground balls, faster action, making them think quick, make the drills harder than the game. So the speed of practice, making the drills fast. Second, he also pointed out the effort. That is exactly why I've harped on using the bear crawl during practice as an extrinsic motivator, why I've talked endlessly about picking high hustle, high motor gamers for your team players that want to get out there and hustle. And then competitions. We've talked about making things competitive, not all the time, but frequently. And when I say that, I mean, if you go more than about 30 minutes to 45 minutes without a competition in your practice, you're probably not utilizing competitions as best as you can. In fact, one of the major parts in the drill mastery guide, the drill design guide that you can get at 80-20 Baseball for free is competition, healthy competition, that is. So an NFL scout told the director of sports science at Alabama football, one of the, if not the best run athletic program sports team in the country. He said that he's never seen anything like our practices. In fact, I've read multiple Nick Saban books. I've studied Alabama football about as close as you can study it without actually stepping foot on campus in Tuscaloosa. We have even talked about on this show how Alabama football videotapes every single player and tracks every single player during practice, and And then after practice assesses how they were hustling, how hard were they going, what they were doing the entire practice, making sure that they were giving it their best and there was no let up. Now, as youth coaches, you can't necessarily do this, but as youth coaches, you don't have 100 players, 85 players. You don't have an offense over there, a special teams over there, and a defense right here. So youth coaches can definitely assess how their players are moving around practice and their effort. All right, for the next tweet, this one was tweeted out by Jonathan Gelnar. Jonathan quoted James Clear, quote, "In many cases, improvement is not about doing more things right, but about doing less things wrong. Don't look for things to add, look for things to eliminate." That is what 80-20 baseball is all about, looking for things to eliminate. And that, as you all know, because you guys are all probably experts in your area, your field, I see the demo on my analytics and the 35 to 55, those dads, those coaches, youth coaches, that's the big demo for this podcast. We do get some college coaches, some pro coaches, and definitely high school coaches. But that demo is of a group that's been in the workforce, that's been out there working and probably has an expertise. You probably all have an expertise. And that's where expertise comes in. That's where the experience comes in big time. The biggest benefit, in my opinion, with experience is you know what not to do, not necessarily what to add. Anybody can add. Young bucks, they can add a bunch of stuff to a practice. A young coach can add stuff. An experienced coach, a wise coach, knows exactly what not to do because they've added it. They've learned the hard way. They've made the mistakes. And now they know exactly what really moves the needle and makes that scoreboard go in their favor and what really truly works and moves the needle when it comes to building a better team culture, a better environment, more fun for the players, more laughs, more hustle. So this quote, "In many cases, improvement is not about doing things right, but about doing less things wrong. And don't look for things to add, look for things to eliminate." That's a big deal. And I know a lot of you are probably nodding your head in agreement right now saying, yes, that's true, because in your area, your field of expertise, where your experience is in your job, that is the biggest benefit of experience, is knowing what not to do and being able to prioritize what is important and what's not important. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use some of these new things, and you should evolve and change and use new and better strategies sometimes, but at least you have a compass. Your experience is the compass. Now, while you might get new rigging for your ship, your sailboat might get some new rigging, you might have a different rudder, you might have different things going, you might add an updated and more advanced tool, your experience tells you what not to do. Your experience keeps you going in the right direction. And that's where I think the biggest value add of this podcast comes from, is my experience in baseball goes back to 1985, and I've been immersed in it ever since. With that said, let's get to 3, 4, and 5. These next two were tweeted out by me. However much time your pitchers are spending on building arm strength, that is non-throwing arm strength, multiply that time by 2x, 3x, or even 5x, and that's likely what your pitchers should be spending. That's likely the amount of time that your pitchers should be spending on building lower body strength and mobility. 2 to 3 to 4 more times. I see a lot of these weighted balls and bands and all this stuff for the arm. Get those legs stronger, get your hips, get your ankles more mobile, especially pitchers. Tweet 4, 2/10 of a second approximately to decide to swing or not. Does not allow for a lengthy hitting plan. Baseball is surely not war, but if you go and listen to Maverick's words on my tweet, I sent out a video. There's surely wisdom in what Maverick, Tom Cruise, says to Kelly McGinnis, who is nicknamed Charlie, call sign Charlie, in Top Gun. Most of you have seen Top Gun. Great movie. A lot of action. Tom Cruise, Maverick says to Charlie, Kelly McGinnis, the actress, in the breaking down room, in the room where they're breaking down and analyzing what happened, what took place in the practice dogfight. They were looking at the computer screen, the TV screen, and she was saying, you did this and this and that and this and this. And why did you do that? Why do you think you did this? And he says, when you're up there, you don't have time to think. If you think, you're dead. And the same thing goes with hitting, except for the dead part. You're not going to die, but your at bat will die. If you're up there overthinking, if hitters are up there overthinking, they will surely kill their offensive production. Do not overpopulate your players' minds when they're going up there to hit. The hitting plan, we've talked about it at length here, the 80-20 baseball hitting plan. It needs to be clear, concise, and not lengthy. Last quote, Jim Rincon. Speaking of hitting, Jim Rincon was a hitting coach when I was with the Cleveland Indians organization. Jim Rincon has been with the Indians for, I think, 20 plus years, mostly in a hitting coach capacity. And he said, coaches, try not to over-explain and get into the weeds too much. Small amounts of simple, appropriate feedback is appreciated by players. Small amounts, simple, concise, clear. Don't give long speeches. Cut it off. Set a timer. When it comes to specific, acute feedback, as clear and concise as possible. You don't don't need to correct everything. Now I'm adding on to his tweet there, but I think it's important to see this evidence that's out there to support what we are discussing here at 80/20 Baseball on a weekly basis. So once a month, I'm going to share with you a top 5 tweet segment. Now, part 2, the Arkansas baseball team was number 1 in the country for most of this last season. They didn't win the championship, but they were number 1 for most of the season, and they hit the ball really well. In fact, they had a really balanced lineup across the board, and I think he made a really good point in Baseball America. This edition was June 2021, so this was from about 3 or 4 months ago, written by Teddy Cahill. The article was called Bombs Away, and the main part of the article is Coach Thompson, the hitting coach at Arkansas, and the one quote that really stood out to me in the article was that it's hard to win in the SEC if you don't drive the ball, hit a lot of doubles, extra base hits, and hit the ball out of the ballpark. When you're facing good competition, it's hard to win if you don't drive the ball. If you're facing good pitchers, you're not likely going to string together 3 or 4 base hits, at least not very often. One base hit and then a double equals a run, or one swing that gets driven over the fence is a run. Now, Coach Thompson surely does not advocate for swinging for home runs per se, but he does emphasize driving the ball and looking to hit doubles. In other words, hitting the ball hard into the outfield, driving the ball hard into the outfield, hard line drives that are over the infielder's head in that 15 to 25 degree launch angle. So with less than 2 strikes, driving the ball, hitting doubles, extra base hits, that's how they got so productive, and that's how their offense has flourished, among other reasons, of course, but that's their approach at the plate. He said, to finish up, good pitchers don't walk people that much because they're good. They can strike players out. Good pitchers can strike hitters out. And because they're good, it's hard to string multiple hits in a row. Get a few guys on and someone needs to drive the ball. Get a guy on, someone drives the ball, and now you got to run, rather than trying to string 3 or 4 hits together, 3 or 4 singles, I should say, together. Now, of course, there's more to hitting than that, but that approach I thought was really good. It's evidence from a very productive and successful hitting coach at the college level that I think youth players can definitely use as well. Now, part 2, Coach Murray. Coach Murray talks about a big mistake youth and travel ball teams and how players and parents can avoid it and coaches can avoid it because it does slow down player development and improvement big time. He also gives us a great tip on dealing with a problem parent, talks about building solid rapport with the players that aren't the stars, that aren't hitting number 3 and 4 in the lineup, the leadoff hitter, the players that are playing a lot, how to build rapport with those players and why that's important. And additionally, Coach is going to share out exactly what youth players need to be good at when he has them show up to his tryout. All right, so we're going to cut into the interview halfway through. Here we go.
You're talking about reps, and one of the big mistakes travel ball coaches make is to carry too many kids, right? So like you'll see some of these programs where they'll have 30 kids or 40 kids all practicing at the same time. As a high school coach, we would never do that because you're losing reps. Like there's no way that I could bring my freshmen to practice with my varsity. And if I did that, I had to know that we were going to lose some reps, right? So freshmen need their own field. That's another problem with some of the high school field, right? So while the varsity's practicing, the lower levels have to wait until they're done to get the field. And that creates a problem too for reps. Or if you carry too many kids, right? Some of these big travel ball programs, they'll run like 1 or 2 practices a week. But you look out there and there's 40, 50 kids, taking reps. Well, they're not getting as many reps. Once we got the fundraising at the high school, you might remember we had a hack attack machine. And the hack attack machine is great for throwing strikes pretty much every time. But we didn't use it for hitters. We put it at home plate. And we rolled ground balls. Yep. We used the hack attack machine, and literally the third baseman would get a ground ball, and before he threw the ball to first, the shortstop would be getting a ground ball, and before he threw the ball to first, the second baseman would we could use that machine and just thump, 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 constant reps. We could get in 50 more reps than using a fungo, but it took the money to be able to, youth teams don't always have that. We had a fly ball machine where we could just shoot fly balls from outfielder to outfielder, and that requires funding too. And I believe that was an ATEC fly ball machine, but it worked really well and it helped increase our reps. So anyway.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear it's great that you're sharing with the listeners some specific examples of what we did. And at the high school level, and it's obviously the youth level isn't going to have that type of funding, but maybe you do. But there's a lot of ways that building parent buy-in can exponentially grow your capability as a coaching staff and your influence. Speaking of which, Let's say you have a parent that is behind the scenes. You hear maybe a parent's causing problems or, talking bad about the coaching staff. I know this has happened it's just something that's very common. You catch wind of a parent that's saying stuff or causing problems, trying to get a little bit of a kind of revolting a little behind the scenes. What's a good initial step or steps that a new coach, a youth coach that doesn't have as much experience like you and I, what's a few steps or what's a good initial step that coach can take to nip it in the bud?
So you've probably heard the saying, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And I think that kind of applies in this situation. This is going to happen to every coach, every youth coach, every high school coach. And there's a reason for it. And it usually revolves around what we started with, playing time or position. So when the kid's not playing the position they want, or the kid's not happy, and it could be the batting order, but more than likely it's position or how much the kid's playing. The parent naturally feels like they need to defend their kid, right? So the first step would be to talk bad about the coaching staff, or they don't know what they're doing because my son's not playing. And this goes on in the stands at every high school program that I've ever been a part of. And it goes on in the stands, but they never say it to the coach. They always say it to other parents. So it's hard, first of all, for you to find this out. But eventually you'll find out because people talk, right? And that's eventually you'll hear it. What I would do is I set up a meeting with the parent and I would make sure that no one else was around. So when I met with parents, there was a kid whose dad thought he should be the starting catcher one year. He was also in charge of a lot of my fundraising. And what I noticed was my fundraising was going down when his son wasn't playing. We weren't fundraising at the same level. So I set up a meeting about fundraising with him. And he said, well, we're just not selling as many banners, this and that. And this particular dad, once he had the opportunity to meet with me one-on-one, and remember, we met about fundraising, he brought it up to me. He said, well, why is my son not catching? And that's a no-no. That's a don't, right? That's one of the rules, right? So, but the fact that I met with him about fundraising allowed him to have the opportunity. No one else is around. No coaches are there. No parents are there. So he could pretty much say, I never said that, right? And he brought it up. And then I said, well, the other kid's better. And that kind of took him back. And I said, look, the other kid's better. And he said, well, how's he better? And I said, well, he's got a better arm. People don't run on us. The pitchers prefer throwing to him. And I did what I normally would do with a player. And I told him my rationale for why I thought that the other kid should be playing. And I also told him that if you feel as though your son needs to get more opportunities and you want your son to have more playing time, I need him to learn another position. I mean, he'll be the backup catcher and he'll get some innings there, but we're going to have to work with him somewhere else. And I turned kind of the negative into a positive. And I said, why don't we look at this like a challenge? Because you've said your son wants to play after high school, right? Well, wouldn't it be better if he could play more than one position? I said, what if he goes to college and the catcher is going to be a draft guy and he's going to sit behind that guy who's going to be drafted, right? What if there was another position he could play? And what if we worked with your son this year to give him more, I would say, ability to get on the field, not just in high school, but after high school. And so I did that one-on-one. I did it in a way where I met with him over fundraising. He brought it up, what he was saying in the stands. I knew what he was saying in the stands to other parents, but I waited for him to bring it up to me. And then once he brought it up, I sort of had a plan of how to address it. That's not always going to happen. Sometimes you might have to be the one who brings it up. But if you are going to be the one who brings it up, that he's talking about the coaches, and maybe it's even affecting the fundraising because he's not doing what he said he was going to do, the best way to handle it is to meet with that individual one-on-one and to have that conversation, just like you and I are having a conversation right now, and to hash out what the issues are and then find some kind of a way to get him back on your side. That would be my advice. For youth, it's a little tougher because a lot of times if they're not playing at the youth level, the parent will pull the plug and you'll never have that conversation because they'll just go to another team, right? And that doesn't always happen in high school. Sometimes they'll transfer, but sometimes in high school they'll stick it out even if they're because they like the school or they have friends there or things like that. But in travel ball, a lot of times if the kid's not getting enough playing time, they're going to probably go somewhere else. And if they do, well, that's one less parent that you have bad-mouthing you in the stand.
Tim, one of the things that comes to mind when you explain what you just explained is your success as a coach and the success of the program was the biggest selling point to the community. In this case, it was Irvine, California, and the students and just pretty much most places, they have options for schools, whether it's a parochial school or a public school. And in Irvine and in Orange County, they could go to quite a few schools and their parents wouldn't be put out much having to drive them an extra 15 minutes. And within 20 minutes, they could probably choose between 10 to 15 high schools. And what I think is what you did so well is you stuck with what you knew was what was fair and was honest and transparent. And you stuck to your values as a coach. And that's what built the program up. And then in return, the cycle came around. It came all back around to people wanted to come play at Woodbridge. The kids in Irvine, the kids in Orange County in that area wanted to play at Irvine. They were not going off to some of these Catholic schools that have in the past drawn some of the top talent in the area away. They wanted to stay and play for you and for the program that was built. So youth coaches, same thing. If you stick to your value, you stick to the things that we talk about on this podcast, you will inherently, if you're doing it right and consistent and you stick with it, you just trust the process, you're going to have more success. And the success will bring in the players. And the success comes from doing things the right way. What I saw with you, Tim, at Woodbridge, you built the program the right way. And by the end, even now, even with Coach Brucker over there who's running it, the kids still they're still, and obviously he's doing a great job. He's a protege of yours. I mean, he coached under you and learned. And so he took over the program and that interest in Woodbridge baseball, or if it's a travel or whatever, the youth team in Minnesota, the interest is going to be there if you're winning on the field. And also there's good recommendations from parents that they liked you as a coach. And then you also win. You're going to get all the players you need. And you're not going to obviously get every single one, but you're going to get plenty to have success. Would you agree with what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I mean, I think success helps. Without that success, maybe I wouldn't have been viewed as such a good coach. I wouldn't have certainly been named Orange County Coach of the Year. But I also think that with success, some of my coaches that were assistants with me ended up getting opportunities from that success. Brucker coached at some really good programs, El Toro High School, which is where Nolan Arenado played. And then I was fortunate to get him as my assistant for a few years. And then he got a head coaching job at Irvine. A lot of these coaches ended up having success down the road. There's a guy named Chad Jacob who played for me, who's now a great hitting coach at a place called the Chapman Baseball Compound. And I'd like to think that I had a little bit of influence on him as well, although he's at a really good place right now and he's doing a heck of a job. And he was a former player who got into coaching. So, success breeds success. And I think that's a big part of it. As you start having success, then opportunities start to open up. And if you have a successful program, you're going to see more kids come, right? And for me, it was instead of going to a school like Mater Dei, maybe they stayed at Woodbridge.
Yep. Yeah. Mater Dei is a national powerhouse in football and well known pretty much throughout the country as one of those top elite, top 10 private schools in the whole country, if not top 5 private athletic schools in the entire country. And so for kids to go there from Irvine is just a 15-minute drive, and to stay home and play with you and play for you. I think that's the thing as a youth coach too. It's that reputation. So you don't have the reputation of, say, a school name, but they're going to know the coaches that they want their kids to play for. My dad went through this as a Little League coach. The kids he never hurt for players to come play for his team, and they wanted to play for him. In fact, he ended up getting players to play for him in a lot of leagues. And back then, for sure, and I'm not sure how all the leagues are doing it now, but in our area back then, you could freeze up to 2 players if those players' dads or moms were assistant coaches. So if they were willing to coach, you could freeze and get, in other words, they skipped the draft like Muhammad Ali, and they weren't draftable. So you could kind of gather up, your son. For my dad, it was me and my brother and I were pretty good ball players. And then he had 2 assistant coaches every year. These guys were knocking on his door like, hey, Coach Bob, I want my son to play for you. I'll coach with you. If that means I can guarantee he's on your team. And that was all because my dad, he won his fair share of games for sure, but it was the rapport that he built with his players. And the parents over the years. So the word of mouth. So everything you've shared, Tim, with the listeners here is stuff that, or strategies that that all the coaches listening these will all help all the coaches listening go out and get a better reputation in your area, in your league. And so if you do coach for multiple years, and most coaches, even youth coaches, do coach more than 1 year. Usually it's a 2, 3, 4, sometimes like my dad at 7 years until kids all the way through. Or if you're a high school coach, it may be like you, 25, 30 years and whatnot. That reputation does not hurt. And doing it the right way is the best way. Something I got out of what you said earlier, new era of parent. I love that because that's so true. Now, some of the youth coaches now, they don't know the old era. They haven't been coaching as long as you and I. And definitely, I know you were coaching in the 90s. And so you saw kind of the tail end of that old school parent and now the new era of parents. So that may not be as big a thing, but being proactive, like you said, and getting the parent one-on-one, getting the parents one-on-one. I think the one-on-one is better than getting the family because now you're outnumbered. And so I know that sounds kind of weird. It's like, well, you're outnumbered. It's not well, when you have 2 or 3 people agreeing and supporting each other, they start to dig themselves into their little bunker a little bit. They get into that little foxhole a little deeper and it's hard to get them out, hard to root them out and get them on your side. They start kind of teaming up. So I think getting maybe the main voice of the dad in the case that you shared with us, getting him in the room. And then, in that case, it came kind of organically from his end. You didn't have to force it, but just getting the parent, I think saving face, we talk about that on this podcast. I think the best thing that we can do, and I thought you did such a great job with players over the years too, as well as parents, is there's a few times you have to do it. I had to do it in the classroom and on the field over the years. I've had to do it for sure, but we would try to save face for the player and or the parent, because I think once you put them on blast, whether it's the parent and they think, oh, if you say something about their kid not being the best and there's somebody else on the table or, 3 seats over in the bleachers and they think that parent heard that, well, now they're just kind of natural reaction in a lot of cases is going to be to defend and explain to you why and go to battle for why their kid is better. And really at the end of the day is you don't want to get into that battle. You don't want them to get defensive. You want them to stay open-minded. And
I think that's where you have to let them know that those are coaching decisions, right? So, that's why I was hired to be the coach, to make those decisions, to fill out that lineup card. So, that's why you want to try to keep the position and the playing time thing sort of as out of bounds, or you're crossing the line as a parent, because in the end, those are coaching decisions, right? Playing time being one of them. So, yeah, but you try to involve them as much as you can. There are times where you have to sort of draw lines in the sand, but at the same time, you want to try to get them on your side as best you can.
Well, I think you do it just like every coach should. And I recommend doing this. You're a fair coach. You start off with the foundation of fairness. You start off caring for players and you start off with those and a fair and reasonable foundation. Well, then when parents come to you with a complaint, and this goes for any coach, all the coaches that are listening, if you start from a good place, then you will inherently have quality reasons for what you're doing. And if you don't start from a good place and you get yourself in a corner because now you can't explain why you're putting, like you explained the catcher and the dad thought his son should be catching and he was the backup and not the starter. And you explained to him, you had 3 or 4 reasons that you had, and it wasn't even like you had to sit there and kind of dig deep for these reasons. You already knew because you were already just coming from a what's best for the team place. And what's best for the team is putting the best player out there, the player that's earned it or earned it the most. And so therefore, if you're looking at it from a fair standpoint, like you were, you will have reasons built in that are fair, honest, unbiased, legitimate. Well, we all have subjectivity is pretty much is kind of inherent in everything in this case, but at least you have reasons that they can go, okay, Coach Murray, he had some reasons that are pretty good. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4, it's hard for them to argue against all 4. So I think that to me was really good. So building player rapport. You've got some, I want to wrap this up with a couple quick hitting questions here. You got building rapport with players that you've had. I've seen they stay in touch with you. That connection is there. They're not like, I'm out of high school, forget that. Like I've had an experience where I remember talking to a player and I said, a guy I went to college with, and I said, hey, do you ever talk with your high school coach? And he goes, oh, nobody does. I'm like, oh, you don't go to the alumni game? He goes, no, nobody does. And I'm like, why? He goes, nobody likes the coach. And I said, oh, okay. But I go, but you guys won some games. And they're like, yeah, we won some games. We won a league title here and there. And I said, but they didn't. But with you, all the coaches, all the players that you have seem to stay. You've coached hundreds and hundreds of players. So of course you can't talk to them all the time, but that connection seems to be there. What are the top 2 or 3 things or the top thing that you would recommend a coach do? What's the biggest needle movers that coaches can do to build better rapport with their players, to get better buy-in with players specifically specifically in this case?
Well, you need to emphasize the team concept at every level, whether it's youth or whether it's high school, right? This is a team. We're all in this together. Now, the way you have to look at this, though, is you have to treat your worst player the same way you treat your best players. And that's really hard to do because playing time will be the immediate difference, right? But that kid on the bench, what are they doing when they're not playing? Are they cheering on their teammates or are they sitting in the corner of the dugout moping because they're not on the field, right? So you've got to coach that kid more maybe than you do got to coach your leadoff hitter and your starting shortstop. That kid's going to require more of your time because they're feeling less than the rest of the team. So I think you have to treat everyone as if they're the most important person on the team. And you have to make sure as a coach you are giving that consistent coaching and sometimes even more coaching to the kids who aren't quite as involved on the field. Now, the other problem that happens in youth is the player coach, right? So the player whose dad's the coach, right? And they call this the idea of daddy ball, right? You've got to treat your son the same way you treat the other kids. And if you don't do that as a youth coach, you're going to lose some players. You're going to lose some parents. So you got to hold your kid accountable too when he makes an error. You got to be willing to put him on the bench. You got to be willing to move him in the lineup. You can't constantly have your son leading off and being the pitcher or being the shortstop. Your son needs to be treated according to his ability. And when I, went from coaching high school to coaching youth, that's the first thing I noticed was just about everybody whose dad was a coach, their kid was the shortstop or their kid was given more chances than the rest of the team. And you just can't do that because now it's really hard for you to justify if your own son is 0 for 12 and he's still batting leadoff, then how can you hold any other kid accountable for their performance when you don't hold your own kid? So you have to sort of establish that as a youth coach that everyone's going to be treated the same. This is about the team. And that means that my son is not above the team. And that's where some parents miss it at the youth level. At the high school level, it's a lot easier because you're not always coaching your own kid, but you still see it's really hard when you're coaching your own kid because you want your kid to be successful. You want your kid to have those opportunities, and you have to sort of separate yourself as dad and say, no, that's not how you build the team. Because immediately you have to not be dad. When you're on the field, you need to be coach. And to be a good coach, you can't show your son favoritism, just like you can't show your best player favoritism, right? If your best player goes 0 for 12 and is striking out, you're going to move him in the lineup. You got to do the same thing for your son. So I think that's a big part of it is emphasizing that team concept, emphasizing that we're all in this together. I got a quick story for you too, and I'll keep it quick. One of my best players ended up getting into some trouble his senior year. And instead of, making the whole team aware of it, or instead of, making a big announcement or whatever, I just met with the player and said, look, here's the deal. For the rest of the season, you're not going to pitch anymore. You're going to be playing still, but I'm just not going to put you on the mound because when I put you on the mound, you affect the entire team. And you're pretty much in a situation now where I don't want you to affect the entire team, right? The pitcher, right, can affect the whole team. So from that point on, I didn't pitch him. Now, the interesting story of that is, right, I kept it between the kid and myself. So nobody else knew why this guy wasn't pitching. So I'd have scouts come up to me and ask why he wasn't pitching. And I would just say, oh, it's a coaching decision. And I kind of put myself out there and made myself sort of like the scapegoat for the kid. The kid ended up getting drafted. And I didn't hurt his draft because I wanted to make sure that he still had those opportunities. But at the same time, for that team, I was going to not allow him to affect the team. So I brought in another pitcher, and that pitcher ended up taking us and ended up being the starting pitcher at Dodger Stadium. And he was very good, and he did really well in the playoffs. And I still remember the story, though, because I was a pitching coach that year because I didn't have, a guy like you, Bo, who could run my pitchers. So I ran my pitchers, and my only rule to my pitchers was one rule: you throw strike, right? We don't walk people. And I've talked to you about that when you were the pitching coach, and probably that may be the only time where I ever gave you a hard time as a pitching coach was if I thought we threw like a 3-1 curveball, and walked someone, right? I would kind of say, well, why are we doing that, right? And you would say, well, I just thought it was the right pitch in that situation. Okay, well, just as long as you don't think we're going to walk someone by throwing that 3-1 curveball. So this kid knew that. And most of the season, he wasn't pitching a lot, but he knew the rules. So we got into Dodger Stadium, and he was going up against a really good hitter from the team we were playing, which was Beckman High School. And it was a 3-1 count. And I called for a pitch, and he threw what he thought he could throw for a strike. And the kid hit the ball out at at Dodger Stadium, hit a home run. So we ended up losing the game 3-1. It was a 2-run home run. That was the difference in the game. So the pitcher comes back in the dugout. Now remember, this guy hadn't pitched all season. He had mostly been an outfielder. But once I kind of stopped the other kid from pitching, this kid took over. And I looked at the kid and I said, hey, man, that's my fault. I shouldn't have called that pitch. And the kid looked at me and said, Coach, we don't walk people. And I was like, oh. He said, Coach, you said it to us all year. We don't walk people. And so I wasn't going to walk him. So I went middle, and he hit it out. Hey, that happens sometime. And I was like, wow, like this kid just pretty much showed me how much he bought into that philosophy. Now, again, the results were not what we wanted. We lost 3-1. That was a big home run that ended up helping the other team win. James Caprillium was on the mound, so we weren't going to get a whole lot of runs, right? But here's a kid who didn't pitch most of the year, who came in during the playoffs, stepped up for the team, and he still understood the same philosophy. And he made sure that when I kind of put it on myself, like I shouldn't have called that pitch. I wanted the kid to know that I had made a mistake, right? He looked at me and philosophy, and he took the burden and said, no, that's been our philosophy. That's the reason we're in Dodger Stadium, is we didn't walk people. So why would we change things now? And it's just a story that I, remember, and I'll still remember it for a long time, because it again is a demonstration of how you get kids to buy in, right, to the team's mission. It was about the team's mission, not so much about the results.
Yeah, no, that's a great point that you make there. The strategies and some of the ideas that you shared with building the rapport with the players these are just things coaches can take out right away and use right away, especially youth coaches that are listening. The team concept first. I think that it's about the team and making sure that no player feels less valuable, but they're not more valuable than anybody else on the team. And that team concept first is something you did a tremendous job of over the years. And every coach should make it about the team, because this world, when the kids get older, the world is a team sport. The life is a team sport per se. We're all working together, not just families, but friendships and in our jobs to help the world be better. And we're just working together as one big team. And so that team concept first is something that is awesome. And you did that as well as any coach that I know. And you didn't treat, and and I can vouch 100% for everything that Tim is saying here. Coach Murray would treat his worst player, and I say worst, the least productive player on the team, the player that contributed the least to the scoreboard success in the win-loss category. He would treat that worst player as good as the best player. He would give those players just as much attention. And that to me, and I think you made an outstanding point of saying sometimes you got to give them more attention, because the starting shortstop that went to Pepperdine, he's getting accolades. He's getting everybody at school telling him he's great. He's getting a scholarship. But the other, the supporting role players that can really drag the team down if they become kind of a bad seed, you would work with them even more and make them feel almost like they got more attention, and you would give them more attention. That is such a great strategy. Coaches, when you hear, I'm telling you don't need, and I'm not saying you should never, like coaching your own son. I think sometimes we get like, we're harder on our best player, or we have to be then go the other way and be like even tougher on our own kid. That's not what I'm saying here. I don't agree with that strategy. You're not bringing down your best player or your son. You're just really bringing up those players that are not your kid for sure. And if you're not, and maybe the kid that just plays right field and gets in half the game, you're really giving them a lot of love more than just the best player, because the best player is going to get a lot of love from everybody else. And that doesn't mean I know coaches that coach their own son, and they try to overcorrect or over exaggerate the treatment of their own kid. And it's like, no, you don't need to badmouth your kid to make everybody think that you're trying to be hard on your own kid. You just need to be fair, just like you are with everybody else. And then I think some of that is awesome. One recommendation. So, I mean, just right there, that's more than I was expecting to get from you as far as strategies. So those are just specific strategies that will be huge needle movers for every coach listening. And then the one with your kid, when you treat your own kid, if you're coaching, a lot of you coach your own kid. If you're coaching youth ball, usually it's because your kid's on the team. You want to make sure, I recommend that you make sure that you have a talk with your son or daughter. Usually it's son in baseball, but you have a talk with your kid before the season and you tell them, hey, I'm not going to treat you any better. I'm not going to treat you any worse. Now, you can also say, hey, I might not brag on you as much out there. I may not compliment you as much out there. We can talk after, and I'm going to give you the love that you need. And if you do something awesome, I'll be be right there to support you. But when we're out there in the field, hey, you might see me compliment some of the other guys a little more often. Hey, it's okay. I'm your dad. You know, I love you. And it's all good. So you can kind of preface it before the season starts or before practice. So I just wanted to add on. You got me fired up there, Tim, with those strategies. And I just wanted to kind of add to those, to just kind of some detail points to each of those. Man,
hey,
that's great.
Quick,
okay.
Real quick, I want to make sure all the listeners also, I wasn't the best with my own son. Like, I mean, that's a tough one. That's not an easy one. I say not the best. I was probably too hard on my son. I think most coaches are too hard on their son.
Yes.
Which is why when I look at like my son now and he's going to high school, I'm not coaching. I think that other coaches he will benefit more from other coaches because I tended to be too hard on him. And maybe that's part of the reason he stopped playing baseball down the road. So don't think that I'm an expert at everything that I do. I would say that's one area that I may have not been the best at. Now, but that was all based on accountability. So I would hold my kid accountable. And some of the other parents would say to me that you held your kid accountable too much, right? So I might have been too hard on him. And that ended up probably one of the reasons why he stopped playing baseball. But at the same time, I certainly didn't show him favoritism.
Well, I'll tell you what, you made all the players that you worked with all the kids I saw, all the players I saw you work with over the years, they wanted to keep playing. They all loved the game. None of them were running away from the game. In fact, I remember one kid specifically who was having such a hard time off the team and off the field and outside of school with his family. And all he wanted was to come play for you. All he wanted was that, he was just chomping. He wanted so hard. And there was some, the school was kind of removing him. They might have even kind of like moved him to another school or kicked him out. But all he wanted was to just be back and play for you. So yeah, coaching your own kid is really, it's different. That's why I kind of wanted to bring you. That's one of the many reasons I wanted to bring you on is because you did have that experience, because I do get emails from coaches and even a conference call or two that I've done with coaches that'll say like, hey, it's hard to coach my own kid. And it is. And I just I was fortunate enough to have a dad who actually did pretty good with that. But because you know why he did good? Because he saw the other coaches and how they were doing it. And he's like, oh, well, most kids, my dad was kind of hard on me at home, but when it came to the field, he probably could have complimented me a little bit more. He could have probably helped out give me you think because your kid has some success on the baseball field that they're just ripe with confidence, which isn't the case. Even the greatest athletes have some confidence issues from time to time, but he never put me on blast. But that I'm glad we could kind of dive into that a little bit. Speaking of, looking for, or I guess kind of this is the last thing I wanted to hit.
Yeah.
As a longtime successful high school coach, this is for youth parents as your kids are getting close to high school or almost to high school, or you're coaching a team of kids that are going to one day probably want to try out for the high school team. As a longtime, and successful coach, Tim, what are 2 or 3 things that you really want to see from those freshmen that are coming out to try out for the high school team?
So as far as like what I'm looking for from an incoming freshman is I want to see effort. I want to see hustle. I want that kid, like busting their butt from station to station and just showing me how much they love the game, right? That's what I'm looking for, because that will tell me a lot about whether that kid's going to be a team kid, right? Team player. Now, as far as skills go, baseball is unique. Honestly, I talked about this at the beginning, just being honest with parents. I'm going to be honest with you. I just need to watch him play catch. Playing catch is going to dictate to me whether I'm going to keep him. And I'll know that the first day I see him. Now, I'm going to give him more chances to try out, because sometimes you have to sort of give him a few days, because otherwise the parents think, well, my kid just had a bad day, or I have to sort of give him more. But the number one thing is catch play. And if you can play catch, you can make a high school baseball. So I'm looking at their arm strength. I'm looking at how accurate their throws are. I'm looking at their throwing technique. I'm looking at whether they can catch a ball, right? Whether they can turn around and throw the other guy in the chest. You can't really play baseball without catch play, right? There's no position on the field. The only thing you do is DH, right? You only get one DH. So you have to be able to do that first. Okay. Now, hustle and effort is going to dictate sort of I would say what I would call the tiebreaker, right? So if the kid is, say, one of the weaker catch play kids, right? Doesn't have the strongest arm, but they hustle and they show that effort, they're going to make the team. Now, they have to be able to play catch as well, skill-wise, but they're going to make makes the team, because sometimes size will dictate whether a kid gets cut or not. But I don't think that's fair in high school, because some kids just develop at different stages. We had a kid at Woodbridge who was really short, and, his brother ended up being a stud for us, like, but this kid was really short. But if you watch the kid play catch, nobody was going to cut him. The kid had an arm. The kid could do everything well. Now, there could be a high school coach out there that may have overlooked this kid just because of size. But eventually this kid developed, and eventually this kid got bigger and stronger. And I believe he's now going to be pitching at University of Connecticut, as a scholarship pitcher.
Yep.
And at the time, there were a lot of people that told me, well, why are you keeping this kid? And I immediately went to, well, pretty easy, catch play. Watch the kid play catch. Watch the kid throw a baseball. All right. Watch how hard he hustles. Watch how hard he works. Watch how much he loves the game. And that kid, I think started off being like a utility infielder, eventually became a second baseman for a little while, I think he played shortstop for a while at the lower levels. And then, you were the pitching coach who said, you know what, let's make him a pitcher. And sure enough, that kid had a lot of success on the mound his junior and senior year. And I think he went to a local junior college, and now he's even gotten better. He's throwing in the 90s now. And he was a kid that was undersized and just had a great arm. So I think catch play is number one. Now, for swinging and hitting, I don't look at results in tryout. I look at path, I look at technique, so I don't really need to see them on the field. And that kind of upsets parents too. Like, I don't need to see your kid hit on the field because I'm not looking at results, right? I'm not looking whether they go 3 for 3 in a scrimmage. I'm looking at how hard they hit the ball and whether their technique is sound, right? And then I can work with swing. We can coach, we can give someone, hitting lessons, for example. We can do that. We can work with hitters, and hitters may not start off good, but over the time in the program, they can always improve. But one of the things that's really hard to improve is catch play. Mm-hmm. You can or you can't at the time you get to high school. I can think of another kid that was a little undersized who was really good, a really good infielder, who last year played for Samford University and is now an outfielder and a really big hitter, hit some home runs there for him. They went to the NC2A, I want to say regionals, and he was starting for him. But when he was younger, he was smaller. But man, if you watched his fundamentals and his glove work and his throwing, no one's going to cut that kid. That kid ended up being a starting shortstop, played second base for us, and now is playing in college. So there's just two examples of why size doesn't really dictate a tryout. If you're a high school coach and you're cutting based on size, you're making a big mistake. Look at catch. That's what I would start with.
Man, you just shared a huge nugget right there, a huge just piece of wisdom that I think is, I don't think I've ever heard other coaches talk about it, but you're so spot on. And as I just kind of back test what you just said against the thousands and thousands of players I've known over the years, you're right on. And your example of as you were explaining it, I go, oh, this sounds like, the kid that we coached. And I'm like, oh yeah, now he's a Division I pitcher now at UConn. And I'm thinking that's who he sounds like he's talking about. And sure enough, that's who you were talking about. And I'll vouch for Tim. This kid, when he came out for freshman tryouts, was smaller than what Tim made him even sound like. He looked like a sixth grader. He looked like an average sixth grader. And he did not look anything like a high schooler. He looked like he could be the bat boy for the freshman team. But you're so right. His arm was accurate. He was good with the glove. And man, he was coachable. He was, yes, sir. He gave max effort. So you're right. The only two things he probably did at all at that time, he had some good bat ball, hand-eye coordination at the plate, but he couldn't hit the ball he couldn't even hit it past the mound when he was a freshman. But that's such a good example of the two main things.
I can give one more tidbit. Don't ever cut someone who throws strikes.
Oh, there you go.
It's a no-no. If someone throws strikes and has good technique, I don't care how hard they throw. Keep them.
And that goes for youth coaches.
Well,
even though you're not cutting, maybe you look to draft a few, maybe in the tryouts, maybe you see him pitch and you're like, nobody wants this kid because he doesn't throw super hard, doesn't have a curveball, but he throws strikes. Maybe that's a kid that you add to your team that you might not have otherwise.
Velocity comes at different times for kids. Like, you hear these stories about, these guys that are throwing 90, 100 now, and it's like, oh, but when I was a young kid, my dad would only let me throw, fastballs and changeups, and development and strength and, physicality just come sometimes later for kids. And they may not be the best pitcher when they're 12, but how many kids were the best pitcher when they were 12 and then they blew their arm out, or they never amounted to much because they never really grew anymore? But there are those kids that may be undersized now, at 10, 11, 12, but they throw strikes. I would just tell you, you may be looking at results now, and down the road, you may be making a mistake, because that kid, if they continue to pitch and continue to develop arm strength and things like that. So when they came to the high school program and tryouts, if they could throw strikes, I kept them. Now, if they were a left-hander that could throw strikes, they were on the team. There was no question, because the left-hander that can throw strikes is going to develop. And you'll be surprised, 9 times out of 10, that kid will make your varsity. I still can remember a story of a kid at El Dorado that I coached that threw about 70, but we taught him how to throw a changeup at like 59. And that kid ended up pitching in the CIF playoffs. And, we needed to have a good defense behind him for sure, but he ended up pitching for us in the playoffs. And that year, I think it was at El Dorado, we ended up going to the CIF finals as well. And that kid was one of our pitchers. And when people saw him, they were like all excited to go hit off him, right? But then he'd throw that 59-mile-an-hour changeup, and it would always be like right on the right spot on the outside corner, and he could get people out. And a lot of times it wasn't a strikeout all the time. A lot of times it was a ground ball, but they weren't making solid contact off him because of the change of speeds, and he was always around the plate. So you just never know. So that's another thing that I would caution, high school coaches in a tryout situation to think about.
Yeah, and even for the coaches that are trying to coach up their junior high kid, and parents that are trying to work with their youngsters, hey, your kid needs to be able to catch and throw well and hustle and effort. Start there. Let's get those two things down pat, and then you can get to the batting cage a little more. A strike. So for a youth team, what I'm hearing, and this makes a lot of sense, you get strike throwers because you can't defend a walk. You've told me that a million times, Tim. You can't defend a walk. Your defense is no good if you're walking people. So you may have the best defense in the league, but you may have the most athletic and the best range on defense. But if your pitchers aren't throwing strikes, well, that's not going to do you any good. So maybe in a youth level, maybe with the tryouts or as you're putting your team together and you're working with your team, you get your pitchers, you try to get a collection of pitchers that throw strikes, and then really work hard on your defensive drills, spending time on getting your defense better. Something you did as a head coach for many years, get a good defense, and then strike throwers. Not necessarily the hardest thrower, not necessarily the best curveball, not necessarily the guy who's the tallest or the biggest or whatever, but you want to have kids that can throw strikes, and a good defense behind them is better than a guy that might not throw strikes or kind of inconsistent, or might, I get emails a lot, Tim, from coaches that are like, so-and-so, our pitchers come up, but we're still walking too many guys, and we lost because we walked too many guys, or we had 8 walks, and it's like, and they'll say, we need them to throw strikes to stay in the game. And I think what you're saying kind of adds up. Everything kind of ties in with that.
At every level, you need to throw strikes to stay in the game. You can look at big leaguers that struggle with command, right, and walk too many people. Back in the minors, you have to have the confidence that you can throw strikes. And that's, I think, when you talk about curveball, a lot of people will talk about when they're young, they shouldn't throw a ball for their elbow. I would argue that it's bigger than that. It's not just about elbow and health, but it's about control. And when you throw a breaking pitch, very few kids can control it. So they end up throwing it for a strike 1/3 of the time, right? 1/3. And that's a good pitcher at a young age. 1 out of every 3 is a strike. Well, you're going to be much better with a changeup. You can command that better. So it's so important that they learn how to throw a fastball and a changeup, because they're going to walk less people, right? Most of the walks, if you go back and look at your walks, like that youth coach was saying, we walk too many people. Okay, how many curveballs did he? Let's just
point.
And how many were strikes? So let's videotape. Let's play a game. You walked 10 kids today. Okay, of those 10 kids, in those counts, how many of those balls were curveballs? And if it's 33%, then you're consistently behind because you're just throwing too many curveballs. And you might say, well, that's the only way I can get this kid out. We'll try a changeup. If the kid's a really good fastball hitter and he's a big, strong kid, why not try to change speeds the other way, but stay in the zone?
That's a great point. That's easy to figure out. Like you said, all right, what's the strike percentage for fastballs? What's the kid's strike percentage for curveballs and changeups? And it may be that their curveball is more accurate. Not very often is it more accurate than, definitely usually it's not more accurate than the fastball overall. And it's usually not more accurate than the changeup.
Well, it might be more accurate than the changeup, but that just means you're not working on the changeup. Like, let's be honest, why is the curveball better? Because we throw it more often, right? So if our changeup's not good, it means you're avoiding it. You could develop a changeup that you can throw for a strike just just as often as you throw a fastball. But in the bullpen that you're working with the kid on, or even in the games, if you call 10 fastballs, you need to call 10 changeups. Like maybe you're only calling one curveball, depending on the kid's age. But, when you really need that strikeout, okay, you got an 0-2 count. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. But let's stay in the zone with our other two pitches.
The changeup is it's typically at every level. It's typically, and definitely as you get to junior high, when the mound stretches out, so you're playing pony at 80, you got a 54-foot mound, or even just a 50-foot. Once you get out, definitely the 60-foot, 6-inch mound, the changeup is even better, but it definitely is a good pitch to use, even on those, 45, 46, some of the little league distance mounts. For 3 or 4 of the hitters in the other lineup, you could use it almost at any time, because some of those, every team, even in little league, has 2, 3, 4 hitters typically, or 5 hitters that have really fast bats. Now, maybe the 8, 9 hitter is something to change up. Maybe you just stick with the fastball, stay firm, go after them, the occasional breaking ball. But I think that's a great tip. Get some strike throwers. If you can play catch, you can catch the ball and you hustle, you're going to have a chance as you get older. So I know we could talk shop all day, Tim, this has been awesome. And there's even a few things that I've learned from you in this little bit. Heck, I worked with you, I coached with you, and I've known you for a long time. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing this with the listeners. I just felt when I was thinking, I want to do some interviews. I was talking to my listeners. I told them, I said, I want to do some interviews. I don't want this to be an interview-based podcast, but I said, I want to get some interviews because I had people like you in mind that I thought come from such a great place with a lot of wisdom. Thank you so much for coming on here. Much appreciated.
Hey, Bo, thanks for having me.
You got it. You take care, Tim. And that wraps up our interview with Coach Tim Murray. And that wraps up our episode here. I will see you back next Tuesday when our next episode goes live. Speaking of next week's episode, we are going to talk about a mindset that we definitely want to avoid when we're coaching our hitters, a mindset that we do not want to give them, or as a byproduct of our coaching strategies, get them into. We want to avoid this mindset at all costs and this way of thinking with our hitters. We'll talk about how to avoid it, what it is next week. And part 2 next week will be part 1 of my interview with Coach Patrick Murphy. You're going to want to hear this interview. It is a fantastic interview. Coach Patrick Murphy shares out a lot of golden nuggets, a lot of wisdom from his days as a Little League player at the Little League World Series, all the way through his national championship coaching experience a couple years ago. He's going to talk hitting. He's going to talk building team culture. We will definitely talk about topics different than those topics we talked about with Coach Murray. So make sure to check in next Tuesday when part 1 of that interview goes live with Coach Patrick Murphy. A lot more wisdom coming your way. And until next week, take care of your health. Keep taking care of those families of yours, and take this information out to the field, take it to the batting cages, take it to the training environment, and make the baseball community a better place. Make your team a lot better. And we'll see you on the flip side. Adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.